that God's got a plan. And if you'll just keep coming back for more, just keep coming back for more. That's my like standard advice for everything. Like just keep coming back for more.
Hey everybody, we are Micah and Josiah Keneally, and welcome to the Young Adults Today YouTube channel.
Hey, please subscribe and you'll never miss a thing. We want to invite you March 1st and 2nd to Minneapolis, Minnesota for the Young Adults Today Leader Conference. This is for pastors, next-gen leaders, people leading young adult ministries from across the country. It won't be the same without you there. Why should they come?
Well, you should be coming because you can have an amazing opportunity to meet your next best friend, potentially understand that you are not alone in leadership, but also just get poured into and just take a deep breath of like, what does God have for me? What does he have for the ministry? And how can I get a breath of fresh air in my lungs and in my sails as I begin 2024? There'll be breakout sessions, there'll be worship, there'll be some speakers, and an opportunity for us just to get to do life and fun together. And we don't have to be strangers anymore. We get to be friends.
It's incredible. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at the King's Council. Riley Meek is the founder, and the King's Council really is your tribe, especially if you're a young leader, if you're an entrepreneur, if you want to move from entrepreneur to entrepreneur. Maybe 2024 is the year that you start a side hustle, start a nonprofit, start a business. The King's Council has courses, mastermind communities that you can find other like-minded people, because look, leadership does not need to be lonely. You can find out more by visiting www.youngadults.today/partners and visit more in the show notes. Here's today's episode. This past weekend, we were just in Missouri. We flew into St. Louis, both of us, Mike and I, through our ministry, Young Adults Today. We're contacted by some amazing friends and leaders, Ben and Kate Burton, who host Remix Young Adults. They are the pastors there in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and they had a Remix Young Adult weekend, basically all day Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Kind of the same, it's been said, is a change of pace, and a change of place can lead to a change of perspective.
Right.
There was a hungry group of young adults, and they talk about what God did in us and through us and in the lives of young people there this past weekend.
Well, ultimately, we just came alongside some amazing people that are in our life to kind of just make their dream our dream, essentially, and just to hold up their arms. So they let us come in and pray and teach and preach and do a couple of breakout sessions where we really leaned into ultimately the verse in Ephesians chapter 5, awake, O sleeper, was kind of the theme. So what our prayer is and what their prayer is, that as a listener and as a young adult, that your faith would be awakened, that you would be awakened in any area of life that you were sleeping in. So we really leaned into that by just pulling and drawing from the text and hopefully challenging and encouraging those who are struggling in their relationships, in their family dynamics, in their interpersonal relationships with dorm rooms and finding that first job and any and all in between, because relationships and people are everywhere. But ultimately, we want to see the greatness pulled out in them because we all have something to offer the world around us.
I think the highlight for me this past weekend was Saturday night, so the second night. And I mean, I will say of this whole weekend that young adults in worship started on Friday night, where most groups end on a Sunday.
Right.
They were just hungry for going after the presence of God, the power of God, and an intimate relationship with Jesus, and going deeper, awaking from the slumber and rising up. And, you know, Saturday night, there was just some extended time of prayer, and Pastors Ben and Kate were on one side, we were on another side, and it was just kind of one of those moments where if you want prayer, come forward, and we'd be happy to just, you know, join our faith with yours. And one of the young adults that he sent me a DM after this weekend that I'm just going to read part of, and this is a guy who had told us that he has 10 siblings, there's 11 in his family, and he'd never been prayed for out loud.
Yeah.
And that was just the moment where the Holy Spirit kind of hit me and just paused in that moment of how significant it is to pray together, to join our faith together, to believe for a miracle and believe for healing and restoration and forgiveness where there's been unforgiveness. And he just sent me a DM and he goes, "Hey, Josiah, hopefully you remember meeting." And I definitely did. And he just said, "You and your wife really touched me in my heart this weekend. And I'm extremely grateful that I got to meet both of you, and that there was just the opportunity to to join together in prayer.
Right.
And I think that that's so, so powerful. We're really grateful that we were able to go and that God is meeting and ministering to young adults. What was maybe a highlight for you?
Oh my gosh. I think it's always when you're in a room that's hungry, it becomes electric and it becomes contagious.
For sure.
And it was not about the hype. It was definitely about the hunger. And I think when you're in a room with young adults that are only wanting and seeking the breakthrough, the miracles, the healing that they're desiring and intimacy with God, I think that just always reminds me, why do we do what we get to do? Like, why do we do what we do? It's because we don't have to, we get to, and we choose to. So I think just spurring on that they are wanting to learn how to choose Christ each and every single day and invite him in on the process of adulting instead of saying, okay, I'm just going to show up and just show off. No, there's a hunger for like wanting to be in step and in cadence with Christ. So I think ultimately is the hunger, and that builds excitement in all of us. And it should, like, that's what it is all about, of, coming alongside each other in that process, but remaining humble in the process. Right. So we're just humbled that they would even ask us to come.
New things in the new year. We're joined by our special guest, Josh Wellborn. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, so good to be on here, and so thankful that you guys are providing this resource for young adults and those who work with them.
You got it, man. It's a blessing. And Josh Wellborn is the National Youth Director for the Assemblies of God USA. He's our friend. And Josh, we just want to kick it to you. Maybe you could start sharing some of your life journey of how did you get to where you're sitting today?
Yeah, well, the elevator answer is I just kept coming back for more. But since we're not on an elevator, I'll expound on that a little bit. But I'm a PK, raised in the Assemblies of God. My folks both serving in ministry to this day, different capacities. They were youth pastors, lead pastors, district directors. My dad was a traveling evangelist for a lot of my youth years. He was a gospel recording artist in the 70s and early 80s. And that was my, so ministry and being around ministry was not for lack of a better term, but for the intentionality of processing this thought. Ministry was the family business, and people were the family business, and discipleship was the family business. And it was my young adult years where I had to sift through calling versus maybe the darker side of family business, if that makes sense. And by that, I mean, when you're going to minister to people and you're going to work with people, it doesn't always go smooth. And prepare to have your heart broken, and prepare to have investment in people turn into infiltrated with weeds, and your investment not always taking root and scorched by the sun, as Jesus would say in the parable of the sower. So for me, the journey was, again, I say just keep coming back for more, because for me, I never turned my back on God. Discovering my call to ministry was, I feel like it was difficult, but coming back for more was easy. If you, so for me, I've sensed a call to ministry at age 14, didn't accept that till age 23. And so for 9 years, there was this, like, I don't know, is it just because it's the family business, or is God actually doing something? And I think the Lord would say to all of us, if you'll just keep saying yes to the little things, if you'll just keep being obedient, if you'll fight the urge to gravitate towards bitterness or jadedness, I do have a plan for your life. And so that was my story. So became a youth pastor at the age of 26 after volunteering for a lot of years in my local church, and pursuing another career, a couple of different careers, and finding, the Lord, I say finding my wife, the Lord giving me, leading me to my wife. And at the age of 26, we both went into full-time ministry, became youth pastors, moved to Seattle, Washington. And then after a couple of years there, the Lord, took us to the Midwest. We were in Michigan for 15 years after that as both youth pastors and district youth directors. And for the last 6 years, we have been in Springfield, Missouri, working at the National Office of the Assemblies of God, as you already mentioned, serving in the youth department. So that's the abbreviated, maybe, hopefully that wasn't too long, but
I love it.
No,
some little details there.
That's so good. Josh,
We
thank
have
you
4
for sharing
kids.
that.
Yeah.
4. Awesome.
Yeah. So we're busy.
What are their ages? Are they into the young adulthoods yet?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have 2 boys that are young adults. So 18 and a senior in high school, or excuse me, 20 and a senior in high school, age 20. So a sophomore in college, senior in high school. And then we have 2 girls, freshmen in high school and 6th graders. So coming into the middle school. So we have a full-blown student ministry going on in our own home. So, and then we have a young adult that lives with us temporarily who's engaged. And so we've got a full house right now.
I love that. Well, thank you. Thank you for coming back for more, because we're on your shoulders in some way, shapes, and form, just because of your obedience. And for the listener, that obedience is essential. And we know that Jesus called the teenagers, right? He chose the disciples, and you said that you were called into ministry or felt the pull at age 14, right? So that's about the same age, 14 to 19. You know, those are teenagers, and that's young. And knowing that you have a couple of young adults in your own home, we would just be curious to see, Josh, why do you believe that the faith of the next generation is so vital and important in this day and age?
Yeah. So that, and I think for whatever the next generation is, it's always so essential. And there are certainly lots of scriptural references we can jump to about passing our faith on to the next generation. But one of the things that is a unique opportunity is that the things that have shocked us in our development, that were experiences we had, be it on the national stage or personal, those become normative for the next generation when they hear our stories, when they live through our experience. So I think of something that's close to you guys, very recent, the George Floyd tragedy. When that happened, about a month later, my family, we were in Minnesota, and we drove the kids through that neighborhood where that took place. And there were lots of people out. There was no demonstration or protesting. It looked like people trying to get back to normal, but still grieving and mourning what had happened and questioning what does justice look like. And that was such an emotional thing for me as an adult to watch unfold. But my children were processing it a little bit different. To them, this is like, well, this is normal. So a young person, these shocking things happen, and they go, oh, this is normal. Now, that's not for all things that are shocking to us, but that's an example of something that they watch on the news. They go, yeah, well, they were, that man was mistreated, and these people are very upset. That seems normal to me. So the idea that there's racial inequity in our society, and that we should do something to make sure that we're helping those in need, we're reaching out to those who maybe don't have the advantages we have. I was hoping that would be the response my kids had. It's like, hey, we can actually do something about this. Whereas as a 40-something, I watched that unfold and I go, oh my word. Like, I mean, my goodness, how long has it been since Martin Luther King had a dream on the steps of the Washington Monument? Like, why is this happening today? Whereas our children are going, oh, like we can fix this. And so this we can fix this attitude, I think is, and this is, again, we can go scriptural, but I'm just talking pragmatically. Like, our kids, our students are not shocked by the challenges of the changing landscape of gender in America. I am. I'm terrified. Like, I just want to hole up and homeschool them, and right. And in some cases, maybe, I don't mean to pick on those who choose that tactic, but it's horrifying to me. Whereas my children are going, yeah, this is normal. And we know what the Bible says, and we know what God wants for us, and we know God's plan for sexuality because we've been taught it in the church, and our parents have unpacked that for us and reinforced it, and they live it and they model it, all the things. So we're not shocked by this. In fact, and I think that it's that emotional state of, yeah, we see what the challenge is and we're not scared. I think that's the fertile soil for the Holy Spirit to sow seeds of solution. And in many ways, they are better equipped than I am to take on some of the relevant challenges that are again, if you grew up in the 80s and 90s like I did, they're shocking. But if you grew up in the 2010s and the 2020s, you're going, yeah, it's normal. God's still God, and he's bigger than all this. And, and I don't know why it is that as we get older, I would hope that as we get older, God gets bigger, but in some ways God gets smaller, because we're going, oh no, what are we going to do? Everybody panic. And I just love that the next generation, that's not their response.
Right.
Yeah. We know this. We've seen this before. God's real, and he's going to do what he does, and the Holy Spirit still has power. Whereas the older generation were like, oh, let's come up with a new plan. What was wrong with the old plan of trusting God? So
For sure.
I'm oversimplifying, and I'm painting with a huge broad brush on generations. But to answer the question, what do I love about the next generation? They're not overcome with grief when they see the challenges in the spiritual realm that are playing out in the cultural wars.
I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about, maybe it's a youth camp or a young adult retreat, or a next gen conference, where I know we were just at one and the song came on, like, when did my faith in the impossible like disappear? So, a lyric, something like that. And I still pray for God, like, I still pray all the time for breakthrough, miracle power, but there's something about young adulthood and just being young that God can do anything, and there's just a pure faith, and we need to be reminded of it often. I think that's what's so good about the next generation being a part of our communities of faith, is there's a vibrancy. The wave starts in the student section.
Right.
We need to be reminded of some of that pure joy and authentic just excitement. And something that we were talking about before we even pressed record was this idea, Micah, you brought it up, of an extreme volunteer. What did you mean about that? And let's pick Josh's brain about extreme volunteers.
Well, I think, Josh, you even kind of alluded to the level of volunteering of which you and your wife were doing prior to being full-time youth ministers at age 26, getting married, and that whole journey that you guys embarked upon together as a married couple. But I would say my definition, and I would love to hear what Josh has to think or has to say about that, or what he thinks about that. But the extreme volunteer in my mind is what I call individuals who are leading young adults as a volunteer at extreme levels, meaning that they're opening up their home. They have one-on-ones. They're doing life side by side. They may be 28 and then pouring into the 25 and younger crew. They may be 25 and maybe they have a lot more wisdom and they're hanging out with the 29-year-old. It all depends on their depth and their intimacy with God that kind of just puts them in the role of leadership. An extreme volunteer is the one that shows up first and leaves last. Like, they are going to hold up the arms of the leaders. They understand the vision. They can help cast that vision. They know where the leader's taking them, where they're going, because we know in any form of our leadership, even the Bible says, without vision, the people perish. So the extreme volunteer, they catch it and they get it right away. Those are the people that I pray for and that I want to snatch right up, because I'm like, you get it. You understand like why this is so important. Like, you and the young adults, they're not going anywhere, and they're going to keep coming these generations. After they're 18, you enter into something we call adulthood. So the extreme volunteer, what I'd say, is some might call it a glorified volunteer, who's absolutely passionate about reaching the 18 to 30-year-old, whether they're in that demographic or not. And maybe they're not necessarily pastor or called to full-time ministry. This is just a role that they love.
They're functioning in it.
Yeah, and they just pour out. So that's what I would describe it as. Would you say that you were an extreme volunteer before you said yes to your call in ministry?
Oh, for sure. For sure. That was the key to unlocking me discovering my calling. Like if I hadn't done that, I don't think I would have discovered it at all. And so for me in full-time ministry, that was essential. But I think that's true for all vocations. With young adults, it's interesting that during that young adult season, which Josiah, I think we talked on the phone about this one, it's the only stage in our discipleship, because we work a lot on age and stage discipleship content in church ministries, right? What are we doing with the babies? What are we doing with the children? When do they transition to youth ministry? When do they transition to young adult? What's the pastor doing to integrate young adults? Like, we think about this age and stage thing so much, and the young adults are the one group that are defined not by age, but rather stage. And there's a myriad of stages within this big, thing we call, so post-college is totally different than young professional or career. Young career is totally different than young married.
Yeah.
Young married is similar to young family, right? But most would say those are all categories of young adult. And here's the thing, they make the three biggest decisions of their lives during that season. And throughout history, it was your family and your tribe, your village that kind of made those decisions for you. And now we don't do that for our young adults anymore. We tell them, here, we've raised you, now go make the three biggest decisions of your life. And you guys already know what those three biggest decisions are. And maybe if anybody had time to think about them, they would arrive at them as well. So I don't mean to be elusive, but it's simply, what are you going to do for a career? Who are you going to marry? Where are you going to live?
Yeah.
Right. So historically, that was determined. If your father was a carpenter, you became a carpenter, just like Jesus, fisherman, etc. And that wasn't just a Bible time thing. That existed here in the United States up until, I don't know, I'm not a master level sociologist or anything, but up until recent history, that was the way to go. The idea of an arranged marriage is abhorrent to Western culture today, but until, again, fairly recent history, that was the norm. And you would never be like, well, I think I want to live in California prior to 100 years ago, growing up in the Midwest.
Right.
And if you did, it was a wagon train and a 3-month journey that might take your life or the ones you love. You know what I mean? It was just a huge thing. Not, Dad, can I have $1,000 for a down payment on an apartment in West Covina? So it's just interesting to me. So you mentioned extreme volunteering. I got excited about that because whatever your career path, if you'll throw with the same work ethic that you just described, a volunteer who's serving, the language you were using, I contextualize for in a church.
Mm-hmm.
But if you'll take that same work ethic to any venue, you will discover whether or not you have a calling, a gifting, if God's given you a grace for operating in that field, be it finance, education, whatever, the list goes on. So I love that extreme volunteering. I would also say it should be contextualized within the church, because that is the community of faith within which to filter interpretation of culture and career. We always want to interpret culture through the lens of, yes, Scripture, first and foremost. And ideally, we do that within our community as well. And that should be the church.
Yeah, so good.
Those are my thoughts on it. I love, you said that during our pre-show visit, and I'd never heard that before. I'd never heard the term extreme volunteering. And so I was very excited to hear that term, because it gives a lot of context to what I want for my own children. Because I know how heavily it weighs on them. I've got a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old. I know how heavily it weighs on them wanting to discover God's plan for their life, but also wanting to be responsible, always, work ethic, all the things. And in hindsight, the key to that for me was extreme volunteering, just saying yes and coming back for more and letting the Lord do the rest.
Yeah, Josh, I can definitely relate. So even elements of my story is born and raised in North Dakota, went to school for business communication. So I was doing graphic designing. I was doing just org charts, all that kind of stuff. In addition to teaching fitness classes, so I became a personal trainer and fitness coach, and I absolutely loved it. Like, I came alive, and it was teamed up with a local college campus. So I'd be teaching classes, and then they'd see me on a Sunday at church. And then I realized, like, wow, there is nothing here for young adults. So we just began praying, like 12 of us. Then it was like 35 of us. And then we kind of captured the lead pastor's eye of like, wow, there's 35 of you wanting to meet. And then it was 75. And it's like, you can use the youth building, but we're gonna have to find somebody to sustain this, because I as a lead cannot take on another, whole, wing essentially of a ministry. And it grew to over 200 within 1 year. So it's like from 100 January to January, we're averaging at least 200. And I would have never said yes to ministry, I don't think, if I wouldn't have been praying, wouldn't have had a need in my life, which was community. So I'm very much a pioneer of like, well, if I don't have what I need, I'm going to create it, because obviously other people probably feel this need too. So it's going first, essentially. And that's where I became a glorified volunteer of just starting a Bible study. And then it turned into a ministry. Then it turned to an internship. Then it turned to internship after that into full-time staff. And then it's like, hey, you're not a pastor yet, so you should consider North Central University, to further your education, to get, to get ordained, to get licensed and take that process. So no matter what field you're in, I would say that this is an extreme volunteer, is almost a beta test for what your life could be, or what we'd call maybe in the business world, a job shadow.
Or
or
an
something where
internship,
you're kind of right. And you're kind of just being exposed to, what does everyday life look like? Does this make me come alive, or does this like slowly draining my soul each and every single day? And I would never want to do this.
Yeah.
So I think I came alive in that world, which I probably said never. I hated public speaking, quiet, reserved. I'm like, oh man, no, I'm good. And now it's like, okay, I'm just no longer that person, but taking and putting myself in those positions of, okay, I'm uncomfortable, but God has something here, and maybe you keep coming back. So I don't know. It's awesome to see that. So maybe you're listening today and you find yourself an extreme volunteer. Maybe you feel a calling of ministry and you maybe haven't even demonstrated that to your leader yet. And maybe your leader already knows. I would say deepen that conversation. Or if you want to deepen your level of involvement in the ministry which you're serving, or longing to see, be birthed in some ways, maybe you're listening today and like, wow, that's me. That's my church. That's my Bible study. What does God have? Obviously, everything is birthed in prayer. But Josh, I would just be so curious. You have 2 young adults, 2 youngers in the middle school era, and the freshman year of high school. I would say, what have you seen like in your own children, or what excites you the most about this current generation that is active, living, alive under your roof?
Yeah. Well, I'll paint with a broad brush once again. Gen Z is pushing back against the perceived stereotype that millennials are not hard workers. Again, just a perceived stereotype, obviously not. We all know examples of millennials who have a better work ethic than their Gen X and Boomer predecessors. Like we all know examples of those. But again, there's this cultural narrative that says they're entitled. They expect to start working at $75,000 a year fresh out of college. They expect to have 4-day weekends, things like that. And throw in there the bubble wrap generation, which was not defined necessarily by a time frame, but rather by parents overprotecting. And I, as someone who's done some hiring in the last 15 years, it's more than once that I've had a call from a parent about a work thing. And so some of those stereotypes have played out in my experience in leading millennials. But again, on the other side of it, I can name millennials that have a better work ethic than any boomer or Xer that I've worked with, myself included. So all that to say, I've seen it in my own kids, and I think I'm seeing it in youth ministries. They are pushing back against that perception, and they're saying, heck no. I think it's the book Meet Gen Z. It says, and I can't remember the name of the author right now, that was probably put out by the Barna Group.
James Emery White. Good work.
Good citation. Well done, Professor.
Got you.
The quote, maybe you can help me with the quote then, Josiah. It was, Gen Z will have the work ethic of the greatest generation, but the cynicism of Gen X. And nobody knows much about the cynicism of Gen X because we didn't really spend much time talking about them. That's me. I'm Gen X, and the way I paraphrase what defines me as Gen X is, I want to succeed really, really bad, but I really, really want it to look like I'm not trying very hard. So that to me, that's Gen X in a nutshell. And so what I even see with my own kids, they're all entrepreneurial. They're all finding multiple streams of income in their teen years. And so trying to help them with how to manage their finances in a way that I didn't have to do as a teenager is pretty remarkable and pretty exciting. And so as a parent, I go, man, I'm not worried about them at all. They're going to be just fine. That's just one thing that I see fleshing out already. In the area of discipleship, I think discipleship for those of us in church leadership, especially those of us who've kind of emerged into administrative roles, we're constantly course correcting. We're constantly going, okay, how do we do this better? How do we be more like Christ? How do we have a more biblical model? And one of the things that certainly has emerged with millennials and older Gen Z is that I'm afraid that oftentimes we disciple students, and these are not my original thoughts. I would cite, but I don't remember. So if you know where this started, please jump in. Is that oftentimes we disciple young adults and they look more like the church that they came from than they look like Jesus. So when they go to college or when they go to a new part of the country and they want to find a community of faith, but it turns out that their worship preferences aren't just preferences. These are deeply rooted discipleship DNA elements that were crafted to look like a local faith community and not so much to look like Jesus. And it doesn't mean that those two things don't intersect, but we all know from church to church, even so, I represent the Assemblies of God. If you go to one Assemblies of God church on one side of town, you go to one on the other side of the town, you might have two totally different experiences in terms of worship style, in terms of sermon, in terms of the way a community interacts with one another. So I really, really want to lean into creating discipleship opportunities that are strictly filtered through biblical guiding principles, I suppose, biblical dimensions. We call them the 7 dimensions of a spirit-filled disciple, is kind of something that's emerged in this office as we've had that conversation. And I think we're on the right track with that. But again, as I said, if you're in the business of creating discipleship resources, you have to also be in the business of course correcting. So hopefully we're on to something good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's phenomenal. One of our friends, Grant, he just was like, man, I don't think it's a next gen problem that the church is facing. He goes, I think it's a discipleship problem. And when he said that, I went, you know what? I think he's right, because I just think that for Jesus, there's one poem that talks about our Savior as the 3.5 mile an hour God, because he walked everywhere he went. And just the pace that he was not in a hurry, he wasn't in a rush. And I think that we sometimes
people literally died waiting on Jesus.
Right. That's not even hyperbole,
right?
No.
and so I think we live in such a fast-paced culture and crave, I think, the pace of what's convenient many times, that it can be, I mean, and at the same time, there is no rushing discipleship. There's no shortcut to it. It's just, I think it's a life on life sharing overcooked meals at a table in families. But I'd be curious to follow that up. Josh, what are some of the ways that maybe a young adult leader listening could apply, or what are some ways that are maybe an opportunity for the next generation in their churches and communities to create some discipleship pathways and opportunities for young adults to be integrated into the faith community?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few of them that pastors can do to integrate young adults into the overarching faith community. The first one is relationship. And that cannot be overstated. I don't know how to I don't know how to drill that into people's heads. My generation, we said ministry flows through relationships, and relationships take time. Spending time with people. And then the second one is relationship.
Wasn't that the first one?
Yes, I think it was John Maxwell said, "He who spends the most time wins." Yes, it was the first one. You're
listening.
Yeah, you're listening well, and hopefully my point is coming across. Relationship. I think that, I know that this question's up next on our roster. You framed it as what can lead pastors do. And I'm going to pitch this back to all all of those who have a pastoral spiritual leadership role in the church, it's your job, yes, to spend time, mix in biblically rich content. The fact is, if you're living a spirit-filled life, pursuing your own spiritual disciplines and growing in your love for Jesus, the only thing you have to add to the mix is time with people. The rest of it will come. For those who desire a more formulaic approach, well, you teach the things that the Holy Spirit has revealed to you and the things that Jesus has taught you in your journey. I talked about lead pastors for just a moment, so I'll finish that thought and then conclude with that in terms of responding to this topic. Unless you have other, we can talk about as long as you want, but I'll stop talking here in a moment. I think spiritual leaders and pastors have a unique ability to identify those who are called to ministry in the mix. And we have a great resource out of the national office. It's a book entitled Called. A young man named John Zick wrote that and just did a phenomenal job creating a resource for teenagers to discover a pathway to developing their call to ministry. But I also think that it's incumbent upon us to look at the next generation, say, man, who has that same calling that I have? The reason that you as a pastor specifically will be able to identify this is because you have that anointing yourself. You smell it on yourself, so you will smell it on others. That is hyperbole. That's not literal. You will recognize the trappings of a 13, 14, 15, 17, 21, 22-year-old who is called to ministry. And I think it's incumbent upon young adult pastors, upon youth pastors, upon lead pastors to identify who that is. And you say, well, that's an overwhelming task. If you'll stand around, if you'll poke your nose in on the young adult service, on the youth service, if you'll watch them interact with each other in the altars, if you'll pay attention to how they hang out in the parking lot, if you'll stop in on some of those youth gatherings, you'll start to notice some leadership emerging. And then you say, well, is that spiritual leadership, or is it a natural leadership ability that God's going to use in the marketplace, in the nonprofit world, et cetera? And I just love hearing the stories of those who are called to ministry. And it was at a young age that lead pastor took a special interest in helping them discover that calling. Author of that book, John Zick, he has virtually every youth pastor that went through his church during the time he was a student and the lead pastor all to this day keep in touch with him because they were invested when he was in his teens, and now in his 30s, they still follow up on him. And I think that's not just one of the responsibilities that we have as ministers, it's one of the great pleasures that we get to walk with young people on that journey. So I answered two of your questions.
I love it. And we've had John Zick on the show and talked about calling. And I think that's a huge part of the conversation when it comes to discipleship, because we are enlisted. All of us have the capacity to, on some level, disciple others. And it might be a vocational capacity. It might be an extreme volunteer capacity. But I think that's so important that we all catch that vision of equipping the saints. And maybe it was like, I know one of the reasons I was somewhat willing to explore ministry is I had somebody take a special interest in me. And I remember before I was called, I just thought, if I could have the same impact that one Brent Silke had on me, and I could do that for one other person, man, my life would be worth it. Like that would be so meaningful.
Yeah, that's good.
And so I think that calling is just, and to now look for other people to impact or to see like, hey, I see leadership in you. I can ride with that. I think that's something that we can all take note on.
Yeah, I think that's good. One thing that we really lean into while we lead young adults is what we've realized the last, 10, 15 years of doing young adult ministry is people don't view you as their pastor until they've been at your dinner table. People don't trust you until they've been invited for that cup of coffee and it's put on the calendar and it actually happens. So we just had a conversation just yesterday with one of our friends on the West Coast, and we were just unpacking some of the things. And I was like, listen, here's the deal. The generation that is currently like rising up, they can view a transactional person a mile away.
Yep.
Oh, this is transactional. I don't want nothing to do with it. Oh, you're relational. I'm going to lean in. And so we're really just uncovering, discovering this the last few years of like, wow, there's a transactional approach that people have in ministry, which is very self-serving and next gen can see it a mile away. But what they're craving is relationship. If they're the loneliest generation, what they want is relationship. And if we can create room for those people at our literal dinner table and say, no matter how many people come here, there's always room for more. If somebody is late, you set another plate. And I think that when it comes to the relational equity of which leaders wish they had to put forth, I feel like what we really do need to do is just slow down and take a breath as leaders. And I always pray for three things. I pray anytime I mentor a young woman, I say, listen, I pray for three things for you and for myself. And I would encourage you to adopt this. And this is wisdom, knowledge, and discernment. As a leader and as a pastor, when you start praying for wisdom from God, it even says, if you lack wisdom, ask, it'll be given to you, right? And then we have the discernment. And the discernment is the biggest piece and the biggest factor that I wish every young adult had when they're making decisions, like discerning, like, who do I let in on this dream? Do I take this job? Discerning, like, oh, I'm praying for this relationship. Do I say yes to go on a first date with this guy that's been pursuing me? Like, so even just the spirit of discernment is something I pray of this generation. And I would even just ask, like, in the transitional 12 years of the 18 to 30-year-old, and you already said it, like, it's college, it's career, it's young adult marrieds, it's singles, it's the occupation is knocking on the door. They don't know which door to answer. The family, am I going to have kids? Oh no, I run out of time. You're 20, you got plenty of time. You know, all these things start coming out and it's overwhelming. So when it comes down to the wisdom, knowledge, and discernment factor, and just those pivotal decisions that they have, is there, like, what can we do as leaders? Is there 1 to 2 things that young adult ministry leaders can do to the best of our ability to help young adults just transition, whether that's a high schooler into college, a college into career, maybe back into the local church? Like, what are 1 or 2 things that we can practically do that would kind of just help people transition better in the midst of the crazy world and decisions of which we have to make, we get to make?
Yeah. So I was making notes as you were talking. I wrote down discernment, wisdom, and knowledge. I don't think I got them in the right order, but I love that. I would offer some alliteration for a young adult pastor helping transition. So community, consistency, and character. And some of that I based on what you were saying, Micah, with wisdom, knowledge, and discernment. Community, I say that from just watching my son last year in his freshman year in college. He did community college. So there wasn't an obvious Christian community there wasn't a Chi Alpha there, although there was one at Missouri State. So he went to that, but that wasn't his school, and trying to figure out where that was. So I know that was a huge challenge for him. Consistency, you mentioned, if someone shows up late, we make a plate for them anyway. I think staying consistent with, and I'm going to use the word flaky, because sometimes when you're in your 30s or 40s, and I'm talking to young adult pastors, you see some of the behavior of a 20-something is flaky. That's not, call it what you want. That's Taco Tuesday in young adult ministry. You're going to get more of that. I didn't put that. I didn't show up because I didn't have that in my calendar. I don't have a calendar. Okay, well, this is the wisdom piece of what you're talking about, Micah. Like, we have to help them with practical things. Like, oh, you don't keep a calendar? You probably should. Let's talk about ways that you can not miss this cool thing that you wanted to be in on. I think of I remember this firsthand, buying tickets to a show and showing up the day after the show, having wasted money, not being able to go to the show because I didn't write it down, so that was there's a $100 lesson. I'll remember so I kept a calendar from then on. And again, the consistency to keep coming back for more in the life of those that we're investing in relationally, even when we don't get a perceived return on that. We always used to say in youth ministry, when I was a youth pastor, You don't get to see whether you're successful or not this week, next week, or even this year. You get to see if you're successful or not 10 years from now when they're an adult following Jesus. And so thanks to social media, I'm able to see my former students raising their children on Facebook and taking them to church and seeing, oh, okay, it did work. And on the converse, I see people that are not serving the Lord that I go, oh my goodness, I thought for sure we were successful with them. Why? Because they showed up to all of our events and our classes. And so, and then character. The character is a two-way street. You reproduce what you are. That doesn't stop when they graduate high school. So as leaders investing in young adults, being able to instill and build that character, we in the church are kind of, when someone displays a lack of characters and it erodes trust, we distance ourselves from that. Jesus didn't do that. The parable of the lost sheep, he leans in on the sheep who is away. So helping young adults develop character that's going to serve them for the rest of their lives, having candid conversations about finances. Where are you tithing? Are you teaching good financial stewardship? That is, finances are so important at that age, because this is where you learn to manage little. And if you can manage little well, you'll be given more. But if you don't manage little well, you're not going to be given more. And I want my kids, I want young adults that I influence to be blessed. So I'll just to summarize. So building community, being consistent, community, consistency, and character, I think are I was a young adult pastor at two different churches, and those had it to do over today, those would be my starting points.
Wow.
I love that. I love that. I think that there is such power in community, in the idea that I'm seen and loved. I think it was a Timothy Keller quote, something to the effect that, to be seen and loved, or to be known and loved, is our deepest desire. But to be loved but not known is superficial. To be known but not loved is our greatest fear. But when we are both, he just compares it to the gospel of the power that community and Christian community can help us to be known and loved is remarkable. And consistency, I think that in the world of young adulthood, this is a transitional community that, if we can be pillars of consistency, I think that that's just going to benefit those we minister to. And the character piece, I love it when we train young adult ministry leaders. One of the things I'll often tell them is, like, part of your role is you're like a part-time life coach, because you're going to help people put together a budget for the first time. You're going to give out some dating advice. You might even, I don't know, set some people up on dates, but even managing a calendar. Like, these are some of the very simple things, like pull out your phone, use this app right now. And I think that with it, you brought up one other thing about community college. And I'll just say, having gone to a community college, we led a Chi Alpha before doing this. In between being on staff at a church and leading young adults today, we were at a community college doing ministry, and it is like the Wild West. Because it's honestly, Mike described it as an airport terminal. You've got thousands of people, and they all have their headphones on, and nobody really wants to commit to community because they're going to be gone soon. And so we're all tolerating this waiting room. But the very thing that this place is lacking is in its own name, community. And I just think that anytime I meet somebody in a community college, I lean in, because they're going to need some extra connections, some extra introductions to relationships. But that's so good. But Josh, we are loving this conversation. Are you up for 5 minutes on the clock where we go rapid fire? You up for that?
Absolutely. And by the way, I've been taking a ton of notes. Josiah knows this, but we are committed to developing discipleship resources specifically to help young adult pastors and young adults. And I don't have anything to announce today, but just know that we are working and praying towards meaningful resources from the national office, and all the things that I'm learning from just listening to you guys talk is so, so valuable. So thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Do 5 minutes at 5 and 5.
Before we set the clock.
It doesn't have to be just 5 minutes, by the way.
That's
I've
true.
got, let's see here. I think I've got 40 minutes. Anyway, not that we need to use all 40, but yeah,
Well,
I've got 40 minutes. You can have
Josh,
as many of them as you want.
Such joy to Micah and I's heart to hear what you're talking about with the AG and just our tribe.
Well, you're so encouraging
for relationships with young adults and resources.
Well, yeah. And let me just say, it's you guys. The Keneally name comes up a lot as I've had conversations about this, because of what you've done and the commitment you've had to young adults. Because for me, I mentioned I was a young adult pastor, but if I'm just honest, it was a peripheral assignment. I was at the church to be the youth pastor. Oh, and by the way, you're doing young adults too. I didn't even know till I got there. And it was not hard, because young adults oftentimes are just a party waiting to happen. And if you give them a little bit of structure, they make the rest come together. You know, Micah, you mentioned that your group grew in a robust fashion just by providing a few simple ingredients. And I think if you throw in an ingredient of intentionality of discipleship, then you're really onto something. And obviously you guys are doing that, but that's what I'm learning. And so I'm looking forward to learning from you guys, from pooling on past experience and looking into scripture and hearing from the Holy Spirit on what we can do to help teenagers transition to be young adults and members of the faith community that are healthy, growing, and full of love.
That's right. God, okay, before we do 5 and 5, I have one question for you. So we're adding time on the clock. Josh, for the person who maybe is in the exact season that you just described, that when you got on site, that youth job. Oh, and by the way, young adults is also your thing.
Happens all the time.
Yes, it does happen all the time. And I would just say, what encouragement would you give to that person who's there is like, this is not what I signed up for. This is not what I want. Like, my prayer for those people is like, God, break their heart for what breaks yours, because we don't want to be people that oversee a generation out of our own inconvenience, right? Or our own, this isn't comfortable, like I wasn't called to this, or I didn't know. So what advice would you give yourself or give the person who's in that season who's like, dang, I thought it was just youth. Like, how do we not overlook?
Yeah. Well, I think anytime your lead pastor gives you an assignment, and I don't mean this, the easiest way to say it is, you've just heard from the Lord. And I don't mean that tongue in cheek. I don't mean that as a joke. I don't mean that as I don't even mean it as a pull up your bootstraps. And I don't even mean it as a motivational statement. I mean it as literally, you've heard from the Lord. The thing about youth ministry is, so much of a full-time youth pastor's energy goes towards leadership development. And you have to get good at that if you're going to be in the long-term race of youth ministry. You have to. And what happens is, you take that leadership skill and some leadership ability. And for me, I took it to the young adult setting, and it wasn't required. It can be helpful, but it wasn't required. What was required was the things that I said. Me providing community, some structure to community, the consistency of my relational presence, and then some character. Because I regret, looking back at my method of coping with my pastor's marching orders was, okay, who am I going to recruit to help me with the youth ministry from this bunch? All right, what's going to make this better? How are we going to grow this? What's going to improve this? Well, let's move it to Saturday nights. Let's man, we can't keep doing, we don't have worship teams, so we're just not going to have worship at all. Just dumb things that I look back and it's like, why did I do that? They just loved being together, and they already had a schedule. So why did I monkey with the schedule? And the outings were relatively easy. No permission slips required. Hello. This is not.
They can drive themselves.
The mechanics of how to run a young adult youth ministry. Again, this is coming from a seasoned youth pastor. The mechanics of running a young adult ministry are easy. The community, the relationship, the consistency, that's where you need to lean in. But you see, and oftentimes in ministry, we think we're being paid to do the mechanical things. Because usually the ministry stuff we've already done that as an extreme volunteer. Usually they add the paycheck because you've got to do some things that are on the clock that it wouldn't be required otherwise. So we try and fill our time with those things because we think that's why we're being paid. And in some ways we are. And I realize I'm getting maybe a little vague right now. And I think I'm also processing right now. I'm being a bit of a verbal processor because you're forcing me to reflect on my years. Two different churches, young adult pastor in two different churches. Well, in one of them, I really was more hands off, and it grew and it was awesome. Kind of like what you described, Micah. And I was 28, so I still was a young adult. And it wasn't very long before one of the other staff pastors had a vision to lead young adults. I think it's because we made it look fun and good. And I think it's because, but truly I was pretty hands off with that. And then the Lord led us to another church that had kind of a mega church culture. Mega church, you say, well, what's the difference between mega church and mega church culture? You can be big, but you don't have to have a mega church culture. Well, why do we define mega church culture? In summary, it's systems and process and things like that. So I went to a mega church culture church, and it was large, and introducing all those systems and process. If I had that to do over again, I wouldn't do it. I would just stick to the relational piece. Because again, young adults are pretty much okay with, again, you don't have to have permission slips. I don't know. And maybe some of the answer, Micah, is I don't know.
And that's okay. I love it. That's okay.
I'm just processing. Not at all. Not at all. I think that I'm happy to verbally process if you're okay with that.
No, I love it. I'm a verbal processor. Josiah's the internal processor. Oh, yeah.
So here's for the 5 and 5.
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Number 1, favorite sports team.
Kansas City Chiefs.
Ooh. Patrick Mahomes, let's go.
Yeah. Well, plus I was born and raised in Missouri, and most people don't know that the Kansas City Chiefs are actually in Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a point of pride that we have a winning team.
See, there you go. I love it. Okay. Question number 2, Josh, what is a hobby that you enjoy outside of any form of ministry? What do you do for fun? Yeah,
so this is one very few people know this one, because I don't really post it on my social media, because I don't know what people would say or think.
Knit.
And I'm afraid of. I don't knit. No, I work on cars.
No way.
Yeah. It kind of emerged because we had teenage sons who were buying old cars, used cars, because that's what, teenagers can afford. And out of that, we're helping them pay for them. It's like, well, so I decided to get a cheaper car. So I sold my car. I had it wasn't super expensive, but I got a $4,000 pickup truck and started working on that. And yeah, so now I went through a Jeep. I went again, just under $5,000, fixing them up and then selling them, not for huge profit. In fact, just kind of breaking even. So I was getting the cars that I always kind of wanted to have as a teenager. So I got a 90s model pickup truck. I got a 90s model Jeep Wrangler. And then now I've got a 2005 convertible Mustang. So it's like kind of all the cars I wished I'd had when I was young that I couldn't afford. But yeah, the Mustang won't go in reverse. So I'm going to be rebuilding a transmission over Christmas break.
Oh, well,
wow.
But I enjoy it.
To you.
Yeah, no, that's my hobby. That's my non ministry distraction, where I get out of my head a little bit.
I love that.
Fun. I think I've learned this, that when we're in ministry, to have some form of a hobby, that there is a start, there is a problem, and there is a solve to it. Whether it's HGTV, house stuff or furniture or baseball cards or shoes or cars. I think it's all great.
Mm-hmm.
That night I run just about every morning. So, and you're catching me on a day when I slept in, but typically I get up and run a 5K most mornings. I can't do it every morning anymore because my knees are starting to feel that, but yeah.
Oh man,
Josh, that's awesome. If you could ask Micah and I anything, this is the curveball to you. What would you want to know?
Oh, I'm asking a question. Let's see here. Gosh, I wish I'd been more prepared for that one.
Well, this one keeps us on our toes.
Yeah.
Keeps you on your toes, huh?
Yeah, just like
All
I
right.
did you.
So tell me the thing that you have to do every day to have the kind of marriage that you can host a podcast together. Because this must be, because you guys fired up the webcam and I saw both of you sitting there. I thought, I don't know if my wife and I could do that. So there must be something special going on that you guys are able to do. Maybe it's that one's a verbal processor and one's internal processor, but what's or maybe we'll make it a general question. Talk about healthy marriage. What are the best practices of healthy marriage?
Well, I will say Carrie Newhoff was fascinated by us and said that we should start a marriage podcast because of our unique dynamic. Just from like how I process my personality, my testing on the personality tests versus his. And he thought, you guys are like a very unique dynamic that I've never seen before.
Because part of Newhoff's deal is like when you're at your best. And so he's like, Josiah, when you're at your best, I'm like midnight, like 10 p.m. Like I have incredible energy. I could write a book tonight at that time. When are you at your best? 7
a.m. to 11 a.m.
So there's
2 o'clock. I'm like, where's my second or third cup of coffee? I'm ready for a nap until about 4.
That's me.
Well, I hate that. It's like 3.
I relate to that.
School would get out. I'm like, where's the snack? It's snack time.
So I think there's
okay. Anyway, back to the question.
There is opposites are good for each other. Like, if we were both the same, my pastor, he would say one of you is unnecessary. So I think how the podcast works, I think we just be us. And I think then for like marriage advice, I mean, I think it's really simple stuff, but like planning a date night once a week where we can get away and where we can prioritize our marriage and us. I think that's been huge. I think reading a marriage book a year is something that we try to do, and just we commit to growing together, knowing each other, having some friends in our life who care about the success of our marriage that we can talk to, that they can pray for us. What else would you say?
I would say something what we're learning in this season, because we're fundraising, we're missionaries, we feel like to a generation as we lead a nonprofit. And one of the things we've adopted in the last like 3 months is like, we need to celebrate more. Celebrate the small things, not just the big birthdays or the holidays, like celebrate all the wins. Like our daughter's potty trained. Awesome. Okay. What you get to do next is we're going to paint one wall in your bedroom. Like it's going to be great. And you get to help. So, I mean, celebrating the small things in marriage and in our family unit, I think is one thing. I would also say blessing and sending is something that we have adopted from Pastor Terry Parkman and Christina. He was a mentor in my life way back in North Dakota, 12, 15 years ago. Blessing and sending, meaning like Josiah will go and get a speaking opportunity, and me and our daughters, like we bless and send him. We don't say, oh, dad's leaving and he's telling people about Jesus. No, we're going to pray for him. We're going to bless him, send him. He's building memories, and so are we. Our life doesn't stop because he's not here for the weekend or a night or whatever, and vice versa.
For sure.
The third thing I would say to the audience is when you are in marriage, there is a he, a she, and a we factor. That's always going to be there. I still need my time. Josiah still needs his time, and we need our time together. And that looks like, Josiah, I bless and send you to go hang out with Brent and Micah. Like just go to a game, go and have fun. Me, I'm going to go over here. So recognizing that apart we can function and together we can function, because we're working out our own salvation each and every single day. But Christ is at the center of everything we do. So I would say for the marriage person listening, how do we do what we get to do? Well, 1, we said yes. 2, we said we knew before we got married that we were both called to ministry, specifically young adults, not even knowing each other. And just putting God first in all things, I think, and let everything be births in prayer. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've been passionate about is don't start anything if God's not there. Like if he's not in it, don't even start it. Pray about it. If he says yes, great. If not, stop right there, because maybe that's not what he has. So great question. Long answer. Sorry.
Well, it's fun to watch you guys work together. It's obvious you enjoy it and are uniquely gifted to serve side by side. That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you for saying that. Okay, here's the question number 4. Is this mine or yours?
Go for it.
Oh, it's mine. Okay, I'll take it. Okay, you can travel to anywhere in the world or anywhere. Where would you travel and what snack would you take?
Ooh, so this is for 15 years, my wife and I saved up credit card points and airline points because we knew that someday we wanted to take our kids to Europe. But when we started that, we only had we had 2 kids. And so last summer we finally cashed in all the points and took the kids to London and Paris. And now we need to go back because there were so many things that like our teenagers were typical teenagers about. And we're like, we've been saving 15 years for this. And so I want to take Jennifer back to London and and do the London things and go out to eat and catch a show and walk through the park. But it has to be in the spring when it's sunny there. Cause like, I don't really do well with like day after day of gray. So, and I know that that's typically what the weather is there, but yeah, we went last May and it was sunny every day. And we really enjoyed that. So that would be my spot. That's what I was thinking about this morning. Like, got to figure out, my wife and I just had our 24th wedding anniversary on Monday.
Yay, congrats.
So oh, thanks. Yeah. So for 25, it needs to be a trip. So I was already thinking about this question this morning, thinking about what we're going to do for 25 years. So I don't know if we'll do that or not, but to answer the question, what's the spot and what's the snack? That would be the spot. And my latest snack that I'm obsessed with, and it's such a high calorie snack that I can eat 1,000 calories in probably 5 minutes it's terrifying. And you would think it's healthy, but it's not. It's from Trader Joe's and it's the peanut butter caramel popcorn. I know. It's my favorite thing. It's my favorite. Like, some people are like, oh, it's my favorite thing's tiramisu or Andy's frozen custard. If you've ever been to Springfield, Missouri, it's like, no. Just give me some of that caramel peanut butter popcorn. I'll down the whole bag, And I did the other night because we don't have a Trader Joe's here in Springfield. So I bought some when I was traveling recently. And I thought, I'm just going to eat a little bit of that before bed. I sat on the bed and ate the whole bag, which is 6 servings at 140 calories a serving. Does that get us north of 1,000? Gets us pretty close.
Borderlining, but that's why you run every morning. Okay, keep that running going. Popcorn is a treat.
At my age, I can't keep up. I can't keep up with my appetite though. The last night I had broccoli and salmon, so
there you go.
It's a balanced,
heart healthy
obsession. But yeah, give me some of that peanut butter caramel popcorn from Trader Joe's and a couple of economy class tickets to London, and we're in good shape.
Okay, well, we could maybe take care of the popcorn aspect because we do have a Trader Joe's. So
yeah, you do.
Might expect
they have everything in the cities. You guys, people that have never been to Minneapolis, they may not know this. Minneapolis, in my opinion, is the absolute best of the Midwest. Mm-hmm. People from Chicago would disagree. They'd be like, "Oh no, Chicago's best city." No, it's Minneapolis. Like, I love Minneapolis. The food, any franchised store that you like to go to, like whether it's food or electronics or clothing, of course, Mall of America has all that. Because talking about the Mall of America, I was like, I don't care. But then like Parker Dickerson took me there. He was at Cedar Valley there for a little bit. He took me there and I'm like, this is amazing. Micah took me there once. I'm like, it's all here. And this is awesome.
Yep.
And I'm not even a shopper. I don't like to shop. I prefer online, but anyway, I'm rambling.
Oh, it's fun.
I do love the cities though.
Well, if you're ever here, let us know. We can take you to the Mall of America.
Oh, I certainly will. I want to come visit your young adult conferences. I know that Josiah sent me a couple of different gatherings that you guys do, and I'm so wanting to just gather as much information as I can on what's working and just being part of that network.
We love that.
Well, March 1st and 2nd, we've got some fun things planned. Mm-hmm. And 2024, it'll be in Minneapolis. There's some fun things we're working on.
TBD.
So it would be fun to have
TBD.
You.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. We'll talk more.
Working on the details.
For sure.
Josh, amazing conversation. If you could leave the listener with one piece of encouragement or hope or advice, what are you leaving them with today?
Yeah. Well, in the context of 18 to 30-year-olds, and we've already touched on this a little bit, but just this idea that God's got a plan. And if you'll just keep coming back for more, just keep coming back for more. That's my like standard advice for everything. Like, just keep coming back for more, because it's fun to do things well and with excellence. It's fun to have the experience and God gives us all talent, but it's fun to get to a place where the Lord has allowed you to develop that to where you're good at things. It's fun to be successful. Nobody wants to be a failure. It's fun to do all those things, but those things only come. And I say all that. Some of us start off C+, and you don't get to excellence without coming back for more. And so for me, it's just a lesson of coming back for more, coming back. You will improve. You will get better. You do get another chance to try again at something. And so that's kind of my life advice. And for those in the post-college season, how exciting. If you'll just give yourself to serving, if you'll give yourself to the community of faith, the Lord will open up opportunities and mentors, the things you're craving. God's going to give those things in due time. So that's my rambling advice, I guess.
Love it.
I love it. It's good.
Josh, thanks so much, man.
Well, you guys are great. Thank you so much. It's fun to visit on here.
This is the Young Adults Today podcast.